There are 3 state elections coming up in Germany. Saxony and Brandenburg hold their elections tomorrow, Thuringia at the end of October. These elections are important for Germany and for the AfD in particular. Let's give some background to these elections. Germany is a federal country. There are 16 different states. Each of these states has their own parliament with considerable powers, particularly in the areas of education and policing. Here's a list of the states ranked by population. Let's look at where some of them are on the map, starting with NRW, North Rhine-Westphalia, that's the largest state, then Bavaria, Baden-Württemberg, and Lower Saxony. Saxony is the largest of the states holding an election. It's only a medium-sized state, but Saxony is important because it's the largest state in East Germany. It's the largest state in which the AfD is strong. The AfD is strong throughout East Germany. So Saxony is the largest state in which the AfD has a realistic chance of coming first in an election. Brandenburg, a little bit smaller, also in East Germany, also a state where the AfD is strong. And finally Thuringia, also small, also a state where the AfD is strong. So these 3 elections are important not because the states are particularly large, but because of how strong the AfD is there. The AfD has the possibility of coming first, which will give them tremendous propaganda value, and there's also the possibility that they can put pressure on this cordon sanitaire that has been placed around the party. So what is the cordon sanitaire? Here's a graphic showing the various coalition governments in the various states in Germany. Let's go through the parties at the top. Die Linke are left-wing democratic socialists. The Greens are the Greens. The SPD are the mainstream centre-left. The Union, that's Merkel's party. It's made up of the CDU and the CSU. The Union is the mainstream centre-right. The FDP is a smaller pro-business liberal party. And then you have the AfD. So you can see all the various parties, the various different coalitions in the states. Even Die Linke are in government in 4 states. Now Die Linke, this is a party which has some extremist elements in it. Some of the groupings, the internal groupings within Die Linke are under observation by the German security services because of their extreme views. And even Die Linke is in government in 4 states. But in contrast, look at the AfD out there on their own, like Billy No-Mates. Nobody wants to play with them. Nobody will consider talking to them or going into coalition with them. That's what I mean by the cordon sanitaire. Some recent developments in this area. In Saxony-Anhalt, the co-chairs of the CDU in that state, in June, they said that the CDU should consider maybe in the future a coalition with the AfD, that they shouldn't rule out possible future coalitions with the AfD. So this shows that there are people in the CDU who are open to the idea of working with the AfD, but this idea was quickly shot down by the national leadership of the CDU. So this position, it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. Okay, there's a lot of information here. These are the results of the 2019 European elections in Germany. The numbers represent the percentage of the vote that the various parties got in the various states. The yellow boxes mean that that party was the number 1 party in that state. The reason I'm presenting this is just to show how much stronger the AfD is in the East compared to the West. Look at the 5 states. I've ranked the states here in order of the vote that the AfD got in each state. You can see that the 5 strongest states for the AfD are Saxony, Thuringia, Saxony-Anhalt, Brandenburg and Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. They are the 5 East German states. So you can see there's a clear difference in the support that the AfD gets in the East compared to the West. You see a similar division in Berlin. Berlin comprises both the old West Berlin and the old East Berlin, and there's a similar division in Berlin as well. The AfD is stronger in the east of the city. Now look at the column on the right. This shows when the next election in the various states is going to take place. Now there's only one election next year. In 2020, the only election is in Hamburg, which is a state where the AfD isn't particularly strong. So you can see that after these 3 elections coming up, there isn't going to be another really big election for the AfD until early 2021, Saxony-Anhalt. That'll be the next state where the AfD has a chance of really doing well. So it shows that the stakes are high for these elections. Remember, there's no national election next year either. There's no European election next year. So this is the last big election for the AfD in a long time. Also, look at Die Linke. They are also a party which is considerably stronger in the east than they are in the west. And the Greens, it's the other way around. They're much weaker in the east than in the west. Here's another vote showing the AfD vote by region. The darker the blue, the more votes the AfD got in that region. So what is the big difference between the East and the West? Well, obviously East Germany was under communist rule for 45 years, so they've had a different historical experience. There's less multiculturalism there. They didn't have the guest worker program that West Germany had during the Cold War, particularly bringing in many Turkish guest workers. And the East remains poorer almost 30 years after German reunification. It's poorer and the unemployment rate is also still higher. Let's go through some opinion polls, starting with Saxony. Now, first of all, we need to talk about turnout in these state elections because it's quite low. It's around 50%. It's around 60% in the European elections, around 75% in the national elections. Now, this is important when we're looking at opinion polls because the lower the turnout, the more difficult it is for opinion polls to get the result right. So this is something we need to bear in mind. And the AfD did do considerably better in all three of these states. In the last elections, the AfD did considerably better than opinion polls had predicted. So that's something we should bear in mind. Now, the second thing is the voting system in Germany. Now, these numbers here represent the percentage of the vote that opinion polls say they'll get. But the electoral system in Germany means that parties end up with more or less the same proportion of seats as the proportion of vote that they got. So say you get 30% of the vote, you'll probably end up with around 30% of the seats. Maybe a little bit more, but 31, 32, because of the smaller parties that are eliminated. So we can look at the percentage of the vote that the parties are going to get, and we can also then guess or estimate the percentage of the seats that they're going to get. So look at all these various numbers here, and we can try and do the arithmetic of how a majority is going to be formed, about how the parties are going to get to 50. Now, the obvious coalition in Saxony is between the CDU and the AfD, but because the CDU won't do that, and the CDU and the FDP, there aren't enough seats there either. Because the CDU won't deal with the AfD, it means they have to look left. A CDU-AfD coalition, it's the only possible centre-right coalition. And we see this in the states and also on the national level. In Germany, the only possibility for a centre-right government is the CDU and the AfD. And as long as the CDU refuse to do that, they're effectively ruling out a coalition government anywhere. The only options for governments, for coalitions in Germany now, are the CDU with a major involvement of a left-of-centre party, or indeed a government which is made up entirely of left-of-centre parties. Here's Brandenburg, a few differences. The SPD is stronger here. The AfD is a little bit less popular here than it is in Saxony, but conversely, they have a better chance of actually finishing first. Here's Thuringia, less opinion polls for this state. Of course, the election doesn't take place until the end of October. We can see here how strong Die Linke is. Die Linke are actually leading the coalition government in Thuringia. The Minister-President, who is basically the Prime Minister of Thuringia, is Bodo Ramelow of Die Linke. This is the first time that Die Linke have led a government in a German state. It's the first time that they've had a Minister-President. Let's go through the three states and give some background to these votes. Saxony is where Chemnitz is. Almost exactly a year ago, we had the Chemnitz protests, which began after 3 Germans were stabbed, one of them fatally, by 3 asylum seekers from Iraq and Syria. Now, what followed were protests. Now, these protests were either mobs of violent far-right extremists or mostly peaceful protests by ordinary citizens of Chemnitz concerned at the deteriorating security situation in their city, depending on who you want to believe. Saxony is also the state where Görlitz is located. Görlitz is a town. It was in the news in June because it held its election for mayor. The AfD came close to winning. It would have been the first time that they'd won an election for mayor in a German city or town. And in the run-up to this election, this got a lot of coverage in the media because the AfD won the first round. But in a situation that Marine Le Pen will be familiar with, in the second round, the other parties, the other voters coalesced around the anti-AfD candidate, and the CDU candidate eventually ended up winning. The AfD in Saxony got into some trouble with its list of candidates. In Germany, there are two types of seats. Half the seats are constituency seats and half the seats are party list seats. And each party has to present a list of candidates for both types of seats. Now, the AfD got into trouble over their list of candidates for the party list seats. The AfD used quite an elongated process for selecting which candidates to put on this list. There were votes and speeches and so on. And when they handed in the list to the Electoral Commission, the Commission said, listen, you can't do that. You've used more than one party convention to pick your candidates. You can't do that. And you've used a different voting system for some of the candidates than you used for the others. You can't do that either. So only 18 of the 60 candidates on this list are actually valid. That's what the Electoral Commission said. So the AfD was restricted to 18 candidates instead of 60. Now, they appealed this to the State Constitutional Court, and the court said that the first part of what the Commission said about having to pick the candidates in one party convention, that wasn't right. In fact, it was highly likely illegal was the term that they used. So they got 12 candidates back from that. So they boosted their list from 18 to 30. But the second part of what the Electoral Commission had said about using the different voting systems, the court upheld that. So the AfD, they still have a reduced number of candidates. 30 instead of 61 was the total on the original list. So it probably won't make a huge difference to the outcome and the number of seats that they get. We'll have to wait and see on Sunday what constituencies they win, what vote they get in the party list, but they may end up losing a few seats over this. We'll have to wait and see. Last Saturday in Dresden, the Unteilbar demonstration and march was held. It was held in Dresden because Dresden is the capital of Saxony. Unteilbar means indivisible. There was 35 to 40,000 people at this. It was the largest protest or the largest march that's been held in Dresden since the reunification. The purpose of this march was to combat intolerance and exclusion. So many people carried banners and placards against the AfD, against racism, against the right, in favour of diversity and so on. Many different groups took part in this march, including Antifa, which is why Michael Kretschmer, who is the minister-president in Saxony, he's from the CDU, that's the reason he gave for not taking part in the march. Not so much to say about Brandenburg. Much of the focus in the build-up to these elections has been on Saxony. You can see from the AfD's election material, their publicity material, they're using this term Wende 2.0. The first Wende was the transition from East Germany to the United Germany. So the AfD are using this term. This is the second Wende, the rise of the AfD and the AfD replacing the old established parties in the East. The person on the right is Andreas Kalbitz. He's the leader of the AfD in Brandenburg. He's been in the news a couple of times recently in the build-up to this election. Two news stories have tried to link him to the far right. First, there was a story about him attending a far-right summer camp in 2007 and in 1993. And the second story, which I think is more interesting, and this appeared in Der Spiegel magazine on Thursday, that this story was based on documents from the German embassy in Athens, which were leaked to Der Spiegel, that these documents said that Kalbitz was one of a group of what are described as neo-Nazis. That's the term that the report, the embassy report used, a group of neo-Nazis that travelled to Athens in 2007. Now, other members of this group were part of the NPD, which is a small party in Germany, which is often referred to as neo-Nazi. They travelled to Athens, they stayed in the same hotel, and some member of that group hung a flag with a swastika on it from a balcony, and as a result of this, local anarchists in Athens attacked the hotel. They threw a firebomb into the hotel. The march in Athens was held by the Golden Dawn, which is a Greek party which is also often referred to as neo-Nazi. Kalbitz has responded to this story. He said he did travel to Athens in 2007 for the march, but he said he wasn't part of a group from the NPD, that he's never been a member of the NPD, and he didn't have any contact with the NPD in Athens. He also says that any suggestion that he was involved in the incident regarding the flag is simply a lie. That's the phrase that he used. He said he attended the march out of curiosity, but he didn't approve of what he saw or the participants there, and it didn't lead to any further interest on his part. The final election is in Thuringia at the end of October. This hasn't received that much focus from the media. It probably will after the elections in Saxony and Brandenburg. The AfD in Thuringia are led by Björn Höcke, who is a controversial figure within the party. He leads the Flügel, which is a grouping within the AfD on the right of the party, too far to the right, according to some people in the party. He receives criticism for two reasons, really. First of all, for his views, but also for this perception that there's a cult of personality growing up around Höcke. The Flügel hold this annual conference called the Kaufhäuser-Treffen every year, and at this year's event there was a short video played that had interviews with various people praising Höcke and clips of Höcke going about his daily life. And this, I think, rubbed some people up the wrong way, because not long after this, 100 significant members of the AfD signed an open letter in which they called on the party to distance themselves from Höcke, and they criticised this cult of personality. That's the exact phrase that they used. Now, not everyone signed this open letter. Gauland and Jörg Meuthen, the two leaders of the AfD, neither of them signed it, although both said that they recognised some of the concerns that were expressed in the letter. Alice Weidel, who has softened her criticism of Höcke in recent times, she also didn't sign it, and she said that the party shouldn't be trying to cause division at this time with such important elections coming up. Of course, Thuringia is also the state where, as I said earlier, Bodo Ramelow of Die Linke is the minister-president. The election in Thuringia isn't until the end of October. I may make another video about Höcke and about that state election closer to the time. Okay, so that's more or less it. I think I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching, and until next time.